Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Black and White Theology Podcast. I know things look probably a little different today, but let me take a minute and explain to you what's going on. Ron, the black part of our Black and White Theology Podcast, obviously is not here today, and I'm flying solo. In fact, I don't even think, Andrew, we told Ron about this. Ron may just be like, what's going on?
Oh, no, he has no idea.
So when you don't show up, you know, this is what happens. But actually, we didn't even tell Ron that I was going to be podcasting. I tried to get him for Saturday. He's like, I'm doing some ministry thing, trying to share the gospel and outreach in Allentown, something like that. I don't know. But as you know, we haven't been able to get on with Ron in quite some time. Actually, I think August was probably the last time we got on. In the fall, when the fall hits and school starts and Ron's teaching and got all that going on, and my kids are in school and they have their soccer schedules, things got really, really crazy on our weekends with regards to being able to podcast. So understanding that this is actually something that is important to us, I think it's a really good avenue for us to be able to continue to reach out with opportunities for you guys to glean some teaching from us and just answer questions that you guys have been asking us. A lot of times the content of these podcasts flows from questions that we get in ministry from a lot of you from either Faith Church in Sellersville or Hope up in Allentown. And so what I wanted to do is on the weeks where we aren't able to connect with Ron is we still want to get content out. And we still want to be able to communicate and give some teaching and answer some questions that you guys have had. So that being the case, I'm going to fly solo with some of our podcasts as we head into the future. There may be a time when Ron wants to fly solo as well. I'll give him, he can definitely have that opportunity. But it's going to be from time to time just me here. I may grab one of our staff members and do some conversations with them depending on the topics. Today we've got Andrew producing there in the back, and so if anything goes wrong, it's Andrew's fault. But I wanted to just continue to put out some content for you as we head into the future. I don't want the Black and White Theology Podcast to miss too much time like we've missed these past couple of months. And so we're going to shoot for a little more consistency with our podcasting. That being said, I think when I do these podcasts by myself, we're probably going to be a little less time. We're usually hitting about, I would say, close to 50 minutes, sometimes to an hour when it's Ron and I. And this actually was intended to be kind of a 30-minute podcast, but when Ron and I get to talking, it goes longer usually. I'm going to try and keep these to 30 minutes or less and move forward with that. So that being the case, welcome to the Black and White Theology Podcast. We're in episode 60-something, 61, maybe 62. I didn't check that before we set things up this morning, but in the 60s right now. And so in case you didn't notice, it is Christmas time. I got my tree. Actually, if Liz starts looking for this tree, all right, you can have to tell her. I just stole it. I literally just stole it from one of her displays she was setting up for the family Christmas party. But it's fitting because if you noticed on our topic today, we're talking about the pagan roots of Christmas. So from time to time, I have gotten questions from people regarding Christmas trees. And so if you come into Faith Church lobby today, you'll see a large, 12-foot tall, beautifully decorated Christmas tree. On our stage, we have wooden Christmas trees with lights around them. And I know a lot of people put Christmas trees in their house and decorate their houses with the traditional Christmas trimmings. But I do get questions from time to time about, wait, Pastor Doug, I had heard that Christmas actually originated from pagan religions that stemmed from the Roman Empire, and that we as Christians, in fact, there are some Christians that are very passionate about this topic and have read a lot about it and are very convinced in their minds that Christmas, the way that we kind of celebrate it now with the trees and some of the decorations and the lights, the gift giving even, that some of those things have their roots in pagan religions that should, and therefore shouldn't be observed by us as Christians today. And then I've had some people whose spouses are like, oh no Christmas tree, and then they're like, oh, but I want to do a Christmas tree. No, it's wrong. It's pagan. It's a symbol of pagan worship. And so I've gotten a few questions over this over the years, and some people just ignore it because they, in their mind, say, well, for me, has nothing to do with paganism. In fact, if you wouldn't have brought it up at all, then I wouldn't have even thought about that. To which some people respond, well, it's a good thing I brought it up because now you know not to celebrate with those pagan symbols. And yet there are so many people that even when you bring it up aren't aware of any of these claims. And therefore their celebration of Christmas has nothing to do with any ancient gods or pagan religions. And so the question is do we, as Christians, celebrate? Now, obviously, we have Christmas trees here at Faith, and so if you're like, well, Doug, how do you justify that if those are symbols of paganism? I'm going to get into some of that today because it's a question that some people care about, and even if you don't care about it, I'm going to say you should, because it's a topic that is brought up and is growing. And so what's true, what's not true, that's always the question we want to ask. And so these claims, we want to get down to the bottom of them, and we just I want to be able to give you guys some answers. When people question you about this, or your spouse or a relative comes over and starts to get on you for your Christmas tree, I want to be able to give you some help to be able to answer those questions. So, that being the case, I've got a video I want to start out with today, and good old Pat Robertson from the 700 Club has some opinions and thoughts on Christmas celebrations. So check out this video.
All right.
Okay, this is David, who says, we have friends who do not celebrate Christmas because they say December 25th is really a pagan holiday. While I agree that Jesus may not have been born on December 25th, he certainly was born as described in the Bible. How do I respond to them?
Well, in a sense, tell them they're right. You see, the winter solstice a couple of days later was the shortest day of the year, and the pagans had something called Saturnalia, and it was a time of lawlessness because all the laws were suspended, and people, a bunch of singers actually wandered the streets naked singing. And then they had orgies, sexual orgies. It was a mass thing. Well, when the Catholic Church came along in Italy, the Romans and others didn't want to give up their holidays, so they said, okay, we'll Christianize it. And so they said, okay, we'll say the birth of Jesus was the 25th of December. And then there was a monk who began to add it up. You see, if you read in Luke, it says there's a census taken when Quirinius was governor and so forth and so on. And they could take those leaders and figure the exact time dating from the foundation of Rome. And that's when the dates were established. And so they get pretty close to the date. But to say it's the 25th, shepherds were out abiding in the field. It gets a little cold at night. I mean, were they out there in the middle of winter? I don't know. I've been out there on the shepherd's field on Christmas Eve. It's very nice. But it's cold. And nevertheless, I mean, what was going on? So all this business about mistletoe, pagan. Christmas trees, pagan. Giving out gifts, pagan. Every bit of it is pagan. Every single bit of it is pagan. We've Christianized it all. And so that's good. And so we have time, we celebrate for Jesus. Everybody gets all misty-eyed. But the truth is, they're all pagan.
All right. So old Pat Robertson is on the pagan train with Christmas. All right. So Andrew, Joinville, got your apartment.
Yep.
Right? Living by yourself, living the bachelor life,
Yep.
Doing ministry, living in your apartment. Christmas tree?
I do not have a Christmas
No
tree.
Christmas tree. All right.
Not
So,
because I'm against it.
oh, okay. Why don't you put up a Christmas tree then?
I just don't feel like it.
Okay, you're just not
Yeah,
not
that's
feeling
about it.
not feeling it. All right. So so what what Robertson is claiming here is super common, all right? And I've heard it a lot, and it comes from a lot of different people who have said the same thing. And there is a little bit of truth, but let me just kind of correct a lot of kind of what Robertson was saying, because Robertson's position is, yeah, it was all pagan. Yeah, the Christmas tree has roots in paganism, the gift giving, the all the traditions that we kind of have as a part of Christmas right now. Of course, they were all pagan. Everybody knows that. And but it was Christianized. So they took what was bad, made it Christian, Christianized it, and therefore I think he would say it's about the heart and how you're celebrating Christmas now, and obviously it goes to the birth of Jesus and all of those things. So as long as it's been Christianized, it's been good. And that may be a good enough answer for you, but let me just correct a few things, all right? Because people automatically go, oh, the Saturnalia festival and celebration around winter solstice, that was a pagan festival. Well, yeah, nobody's denying that. Nobody's going to deny that that was something that actually took place, actually on December 17th, and at most it went for a week, so 3 days to a week is really what it went to, that festival. And then there was not a suspension of all laws, and so Robertson's wrong in saying, oh, all laws were suspended, everyone could do whatever they want. That's just not true. You couldn't go out and murder. It wasn't like the purge where everything's no laws, you can do whatever you want. It was not a purge every year. But there was a lot of sexual immorality that took place during that festival and during that celebration. But it never actually went up to December 25th. The latest it would have absolutely gone would have been December 24th. And so to say that the Christian church in the Roman Empire took the pagan festivals because they didn't want to give them up and Christianize them, there's just no record of that. And it's like one of those things that someone says it, then someone else says it, and then it gains steam, and it gains momentum, and then more people say it, and then it just becomes something that, oh, of course this is true. And then Christians are kind of brought into it and said, well, hold on, we just Christianized pagan holidays. Why would we do that? There is absolutely no record and no source that the early Christians took these pagan holidays and said, well, we've got to Christianize them because they don't want to give them up. And if you look at the expanse of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, it was one of, and just read the Apostle Paul's writings, it was one of separate yourself from that which is evil, right? What Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians, right? Don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers, right? And so there are certain things in culture you can redeem as Christians, all right? There's certain things you should reject. So when it comes to cultural things that aren't necessarily Christian, but aren't necessarily wrong either. There are certain things you need to reject because maybe they are wrong. Then there are certain things that maybe you redeem in culture. And so sometimes we feel the tension between, hey, is this something we reject or is this something we redeem? The reality with the Christmas traditions, it seems as though there's so much evidence that the early Christian church actually rejected all of these festivals of the pagan religion. There was no syncretism within the early apostolic church where they tried to marry paganism with Christianity. They fully rejected it. And so if you try and press people on, well, how do you know this? What's your sources? What are your sources for this claim that the early Christians Christianized Saturnalia and these other things around the end of December to try to make them Christian? There's simply no record that they tried to do that. What about December 25th? The reason we celebrate on December 25th is really because that's when the early Christians actually thought that Jesus was born. And the way they dated that, based on the evidence that they had and who was ruling at the time, and when Mary would have become pregnant, back that up, which would have been Jesus probably was, they thought was birthed birth in December, because 9 months earlier would have been when she would have conceived, and they, just by dating the life of Jesus and the time frame there, they thought it was right around December 25th. Now, the point of my discussion here is not to debate whether Jesus was born on December 25th or not. But the early Christians celebrated December 25th because that's when they thought Jesus was born. They didn't look at the culture around them and say, oh, there's these festivals of the pagans, and we need to Christianize them around this time, so let's just make it about Jesus' birth. That's not what happened, and there's no evidence to support that claim. All the evidence points to the fact that Jesus actually, or the early Christians actually thought that Jesus was born at that time. And then there's the whole, well, what about the Sol Invictus? Okay, so if people bring up the Sol Invictus celebration, and that has that pagan celebration, that Christians or Christmas has its roots in that pagan celebration. Well, that didn't happen until the 4th century under Constantine. So if someone wants to bring up the Sol Invictus, I would just say that for the first 350 years of church history, when they started celebrating the birth of Christ, it was later that the Sol Invictus came along, probably around 350 AD under Constantine, and so that dated a later time, and so Christians were celebrating the birth of Christ in December before the Sol Invictus, and so those are kind of the two big ones that people bring up. The Saturnalius was the original pagan celebration from which Christmas now comes. There's just no evidence that how we observe Christmas today stemmed from that. As Christians, we celebrate Christmas traditionally because the earliest Christians began to celebrate the birth of Jesus, and they thought Jesus was born on the 25th. Okay, fair enough, Doug. What about our decorations? What about the tree? What about the traditions of the Yule log and stuff like that? Certainly, I've heard, and it's been documented, right, that those have their roots within pagan religions as well. Therefore, we should abstain from any type of Christmas trees because of that. The reality is, there was a lot of religions that did a lot of things with trees, and I think what's actually happened over the years is we can find a pagan religion that did stuff with trees and decorated trees and say, oh, that's where Christmas came from, and it seemed to be at the same time of the year that Christians were celebrating the birth of Christ, and so then we adopted these pagan. Well, first of all, if Christianity didn't adopt pagan celebrations and Christianize them, which I've already argued, I don't think that's what was happening at all. I think Christians pulled themselves out of the pagan world. And every apostolic writing in the Scriptures seems to indicate that that's what the Apostle Paul and the early apostles taught, that we're a peculiar people, separated, sanctified, set apart. We're holy people, right? We're to come out from among them and be separate. And so I don't think they redeemed pagan rituals and then said, well, let's make them Christian. I think they began to celebrate as the ancient Jewish people did, because you got to remember, the Jewish people who became Christians were used to celebrating feasts and festivals under the Old Covenant law. And so I think part of that, even that Jewish culture of celebration began to come into the church, and they began to celebrate now New Covenant glories and New Covenant things that they had received from God as a result of the New Covenant. And so celebrating those blessings of the New Covenant became part of what the church started to do. But a lot of pagan religions have done a lot of things with trees over the years. And to simply say, oh, well, that's where the Christmas tree came from, again, it's just hard to find any real solid evidence. People, to just claim something is one thing, but when someone claims something, we always need to press and say, okay, what's your source? What's the original source for that? Well, I got it from this YouTube video. Okay, well, what was his original source? Well, he got it from this guy. And a lot of times you can trace the sources back, and a lot of times when you find the original source, it doesn't date back to the original time period, okay? And so what we have to do when we're studying history, particularly church history, is we have to try and find the early sources that we can that are the most reliable to try to understand what was going on in those cultures and how it made its way now to modern day culture. So where did the tree come from? Well, the reality is, if anyone says they know for sure, I would argue nobody really knows for sure. There's a couple of different thoughts out there. There's a legend of Boniface. I won't go into the St. Boniface too much. There's a legend of him actually in his effort to denounce paganism, used the Christmas tree and cut it down as a symbol of denouncing, pagan symbols and stuff like that. That's a legend. We're not really sure how much of the Boniface legend is true. Again, if you want to look that up and read about that a little more, you can do that. Some will argue that the Christmas tree became part of a Christian tradition under Martin Luther, and now you're talking probably the 1500s, obviously, and the Reformation, that the Christmas tree started to become a tradition then. It's possible. There's some stories about Luther perhaps having a tree and putting candles on it and using it within Christian worship. Again, some of that's more legend. And again, anytime people start going into these, no, that happened for sure. We know that happened for sure. Again, I would just say, what's the source? What's the original source? How do you know that to be true? And we need to be able to kind of go to our sources. And so a lot of what I'm giving here today is like, well, where's the source? Where's the source? It's just hard to find original sources that substantiate some of these claims. We do know that the paradise trees were celebrated by Christians in Europe as a result of Adam and Eve Day. And so on Adam and Eve Day, there's the story in Genesis that there was a tree in the garden. And by the way, trees and the tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, these garden-like trees are all over the Bible. They're in Eden. We see them represented in the Old Covenant temple. We also see trees in the book of Revelation describing the new heaven and the new earth. And so the tree of the knowledge of good and evil had the fruit on it that Adam and Eve ate. And so the Christians in Europe, probably around the 1500s, time of the Reformation, would have these paradise trees where they would reenact the Adam and Eve story from the book of Genesis. And it was done with evergreen trees. And so as a result of those plays and acting out those stories from the Bible, they would bring these evergreen trees in, probably mostly too because it was winter, and if the trees didn't have leaves on them, or if they were barren, it just wouldn't look right. So they would bring in evergreen trees anyway, and then they would decorate them, and they would have they were called paradise trees, and have the Adam and Eve Day and celebrate that. And so it's probably, if you had to ask me, Doug, it probably stemmed from that, and then began to become more of a tradition around Christmas time within the Christian community there, under in the Holy Roman Empire during that time. What about gift giving? Also, let me just touch on this real quick. Some people will talk to you about, and I didn't write down the reference, and it's slipping my mind there. There's an Old Testament reference about cutting down a tree and bringing it in and decorating it, things like that, okay? And say, the Bible says you shouldn't cut down a tree and bring it into your house and decorate it. It's in the Bible, and I can put that in the notes after we get done here, or maybe Andrew can look it up if you can find that. It's an old covenant prophet, and I can't remember, Nehemiah maybe. And so let me know if you get that verse, Andrew, and we'll let everyone know. He's looking that up. That verse is clear, and if someone said, hey, the Bible says you shouldn't cut down a tree, bring it into your house, that verse is clearly talking about making an idol out of wood. All right? And so if anyone tries to convince you that Christmas trees are bad because this Old Testament, that is idolatry, and he is telling them not to cut down trees and make idols out of them and bring them into their homes and worship them. Okay? And I know most people will be like, well...
It's Jeremiah.
It is? Oh, it's Jeremiah? What's
Jeremiah 10, 3-4.
Jeremiah 10, 3-4. All right? So if someone's like, Jeremiah 10, 3-4, don't have a Christmas tree, okay? It's talking about fashioning an idol. So, Christmas gifts. What about Christmas gifts? Well, there's a lot of different, obviously Pat Roberts said, that's pagan, that's pagan, that's pagan. Well, let me just say this, okay? The act of gift giving is not exclusive to pagans or Christians. It's something that people in society have done probably since the beginning of time, okay? So it's not exclusive to just pagans, and then all of a sudden Christians are like, oh, pagans give gifts, let's start giving gifts too. There's no evidence whatsoever that the gift giving has its roots in paganism at all. So what of gift giving? And what of the, running down the stairs and opening up gifts and the giving of gifts? It's actually a relatively new tradition within Christianity. It's actually not that old. Probably dates probably to the 1800s, the last 100, 150 years. It hasn't been maybe 200 years. I don't quote me on these dates, but the gift giving, even if it's the last 200 or 300 years, has not been a long-standing tradition within the Christian church. Why has gift giving become such a thing? Well, obviously the wise men brought gifts. Okay, so we know that they came and brought gifts, and some people say, well, but the wise men were Eastern religious men who were pagans themselves, and yet where do we find them in the birth narrative? Bowing before Jesus. So if you're bowing before Jesus, I don't think you're no longer pagan, right? They don't go back to Herod and say, hey, here he is, go kill him. They bring him gifts and they worship him. And so the tradition of gift giving, I think, has something to do with stemming from the actual birth narrative and the wise men giving to him gifts of worship. What I tell my family when it comes to gift giving at Christmas time is our gifts are given out of a recognition of the gift that was given to us when Christ was born. The gift of life, the gift of forgiveness, reconciliation, justification, adoption, propitiation, all of the riches of the glories of Christ. It is the free gift of salvation, right? And so as such, I think it is perfectly acceptable with that in mind to give gifts out of worship and out of recognition and out of a heart that says, man, I am so thankful for the gift that was given to me. I want to give to others. And so when we give to others, we're sacrificing, we're giving in the same way that Christ gave all to us. Now, here's the warning, right? What of the commercialization of all, the decorations and the gift giving? Yeah. Modern capitalists saw the money to be made through the traditions of Christmas, and boy, have they made money. And they've run with it. And so certainly Christmas has been blown up beyond what it should be from a commercialization standpoint. All right, and this is why Charlie Brown was right. Why he was right to be so frustrated that Christmas had become about so much more than the one thing that it really originally was about, recognizing the incarnation, the advent of Christ. And that cannot be missed, because the earliest Christians knew how important it was that God clothed himself in human flesh, that he came to earth. He lived a sinless life, and he died the death that we should have died. And so when we receive the gift of the righteousness of Christ, we receive the gift of adoption as sons and daughters. It is good and well to sing of that, to celebrate that, to be reminded of that. And I'm okay. I love giving gifts to my kids, my family. I love giving gifts. I don't care so much about receiving gifts. I love doing it, and I love to. I mean, I've been buying Christmas gifts for a few months now, and just go online and buy gifts for my wife, for my kids, family members, people I love. In some way, it's a reflection of Christ, his sacrificial love for us, to sacrifice something to give to another. And I think keeping that as the central theme and motivation for everything that we do at Christmas time is so important. So if you want to get a Christmas tree, I would tell you there's nothing wrong or pagan or evil about having a Christmas tree with lights on it that looks beautiful in your home. I personally don't have a problem with that, and I would never put that burden upon somebody to feel like they were wrong for doing that. Now, having said that, what if you're convinced in your heart? This is one of those issues where, man, I'm convinced, Doug, in my heart that this is wrong. This is, you haven't convinced me, Doug. I'm not going to go out and buy a Christmas tree and celebrate Christmas. That's fine. That's fine. We're not commanded to celebrate this holiday. All right, we're commanded to worship Christ. We're commanded to love and serve him. You're not commanded to give gifts to your kids. You're not commanded to put up decorations. Yeah, just not. Okay, you're not commanded to watch corny Hallmark movies about the big city girl who meets the country guy and falls in love. Right. So if you choose, because of your conscience, to avoid and refrain from Christmas celebrations and decorations, that is fine. All right? I would place this in the situation that Paul placed the eating of meat offered to idols. Some people said, that meat is from the pagan temples. You can't eat that. Paul says, you're no more spiritual if you eat the meat. You're no more spiritual if you refrain. But each one should live according to his conscience. Now, the issue of liberty involves the issue of love, right? If your actions cause another to stumble, then you need to refrain. And so that's with regards to the weaker brother. And so my position on this is the tree is fine. We're not sinning by putting them up. I would say if we make more of Christmas, if Christmas for us is, hey, let's go into a lot of debt and buy a lot of presents that are going to fall apart in another year or two, and let's, we have to hang out with people we don't like or whatever. There's all these weird obligations with Christmas. Once Christmas starts to pull its focus away from Christ, the incarnation, and him clothing himself in human flesh, descending to us, becoming one of us so that he could live a perfect life and die an atoning death. If that gets lost in the background with all the craziness of rocking around the Christmas tree and shopping and parties, then I think we have a real problem, and we all struggle with that every year. And so at the end of the day, let's celebrate, and let's celebrate well, and let's celebrate with joy. One of the things that I was thinking of as I approach the Christmas Eve service here at Faith, and this year we're doing a Christmas Eve service at 10 a.m. Christmas falls on a Sunday, or Christmas Eve falls on a Sunday this year. And so we're going to have our Christmas Eve service at 10 a.m. on December 24th, Christmas Eve. And I've been thinking, Lord, where do we want to go? What do we want to emphasize? What's our theme for this service? And the one word that kept coming back to my mind was joy. I think we have a culture where we have a lot of stuff. I just took my second son, Drew, to buy his first car. He bought a 2009 Honda Civic with 79,000 miles on it. And we were talking to the salesman, and a Christian guy named Whitney. Awesome guy, awesome experience. And he said, Doug, I sell cars here, and everyone comes in needing the latest and the greatest. And they're so consumed with having more and having more and having more, and they're miserable. And he says, I get yelled at, I get cursed at, and there's no joy. And I see that in the Christian homes too. We have so much wealth and prosperity and comfort. Why is it that we have so little joy? And so we're going to talk about that here at Faith Church on Christmas Eve, and talk about joy and how Christ is our soul-satisfying source of joy. So until next time, Merry Christmas. Have a great weekend.